Good morning, good afternoon, or wherever you're at in the world. Welcome to Across the Pond, the podcast where I speak to people around the world. And this is an episode where I get to speak to someone literally across the pond. Dude, it's awesome. I get to speak with Colum today. He is an Irishman from Ireland. I mean, where else? And we get to... honestly, this is just like a big history lesson. It's really cool. There's a lot of information that Colum just lovingly spewed out. It was really, really awesome. I got to learn so much about him and just who he is and his passions and even some family history. Not to mention, dude, he's a hand-egg fan. Well, football, American football, if you will, hand-egg. So we talk a bit about sports as well, but I learned so much in this conversation. It was just fantastic and so much fun. Hello?
Hi, Daniel.
Hi there, how are you?
I'm good. How are you keeping?
I'm doing well, thanks. How is
Magic.
Man, it's so cool to hear people speak like that, because I'm from the States, and so we don't have people say stuff like that, like magic, like, what? Like, it's so cool to me.
Well, I don't know if I'd take me as typical. I tend to use a lot of colomisms and stuff. So we do use, I suppose, a lot of colloquialisms in Ireland, and we do have our Irish accents.
Yeah, I actually have a buddy of mine that's from Ireland. Met him through gaming and everything. Super, super chill guy. But whenever I do speak to him, he's got the Irish accent and everything, and it's not as profound as yours. Like, you can tell that he's from Ireland, but it's not as deep. And so, to hear you speak, it's just like, oh man, I love it, man. I love Ireland. It's beautiful.
It is. It's a properly brilliant little island. Have you been able to visit yourself?
I have.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, a little backstory. I was actually able to study abroad for 3 months a couple of years ago in Germany. And when I was doing this program, the way that it was built was that we would have 2 weeks of 4-hour classes. It was one class Monday through Friday. And then on the third week, instead of doing class for that third week, we'd actually have a week to travel. So 2 weeks of class and then a week of travel, and then 2 weeks of class and a week of travel. And however long it was is, I can't remember how long we did that for, but we did it for a while. And when I was able to travel, I traveled 1 week from London. I flew into London at like midnight or something like that. And I think it was like Heathrow. And then I took a train up to Scotland overnight a few days later, and then I flew over to Ireland, and I stayed in Dublin for a day or two and got to visit the cliffs, and I was able to go to the Guinness factory and all this stuff. It was really cool. It was beautiful.
Nice. I'm glad you had such a good experience. And I think studying abroad is just a wonderful experience for people, and they can get so much out of it.
Oh yeah. And I will say this, I can remember when because we took, oh gosh, what was it called? Like Paddy Wagon or something like that. Like a super basic Irish name, like when you think of Ireland, you think of like, Paddy, whatever it is, Green Leprechauns or whatever. And so we took this tour guide bus thing from Dublin all the way out to the cliffs, right? And so as we're traveling through the countryside and whatnot, you see all those giant white rock fences or whatever it is. And like I was like, that's so cool, because that's the stuff that you see in like movies and you hear about and you see pictures of on the internet. But like when you're there to actually like see it and experience it, and it's not just in like one area, it's throughout a majority of the country. It was so cool.
Yeah, no, we are lucky, and I think people, once you get out of and I love Dublin. Dublin's a great city, and there's loads to explore in Dublin. You can do really nice day trips, but I mean, Dublin is a metropolitan city. Once you get out of Dublin, Ireland really is the kind of great green bucolic nation that people imagine it to be.
Yeah, it's oh my goodness. Like, here's the thing, I was sadly not able to go to Northern Ireland. Can you tell me if there is a difference between what is considered just Ireland and Northern Ireland?
Yeah, they're technically two. I mean, they're two separate countries. They're under different jurisdictions. We are a 26 county republic here in the south, as we say, and Northern Ireland is under UK rule.
Okay.
It's 6 counties, and so obviously that caused a lot of friction for a time. But fortunately, we have seen most of that put to bed, and the Good Friday Agreement did bring peace to the island. But I did grow up at a time when, bombings and shootings were a regular occurrence up north.
Bombings and shootings?
Hmm. Yeah,
As as
bombings,
as in like
bombings
a
and shootings.
terrorist kind of thing, or just like a sort of people didn't agree with what was happening?
No, as in, so you would have had the IRA, and you would have had loyalist, factions, the UDA, the UVF, the LVF, and you would have had, other splinter Republican groups, the INLA, and various others. So there was a war that was, waged for. Um, 30 odd years up north, so thousands of people die horribly in conflict, and fortunately was eventually put to bed. The obviously, look, there are still simmering tensions on both sides, but the violence, the everyday violence that occurred, no longer does happens. I mean, it took a real tragedy there. So after the first IRA ceasefire, the second IRA ceasefire, but the permanent ceasefire, there was a Republican splinter group who planted a bomb in a town called Oma, and it exploded and it killed, I believe, 26 people.
Wow.
And that, I don't know if the 26 includes a lady who was pregnant with twins.
Oh,
And everyone was repulsed by that. And I think that ensured that people said, we are never going back to this. And so the appetite, or the acceptance of violence died that day, and that certainly changed things, but it is awful that it took that to get us to this point.
yeah. And like, here's the thing: I literally had no idea that there was a war going on like that. Like, this is honestly the first time that I'm ever hearing about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, and we have a wonderful way of understatement in Ireland. We called that the Troubles. We called it a 30,
The troubles, I like it.
yeah, a 30-year civil war up north, the Troubles. So that was interesting in and of itself. But yeah, that was a bleak period in Irish history, and how it all came about is obviously pretty bleak as well.
Hmm. Man, that's rough, man. And when did that start? Was that like recent?
Um, well, I mean, Ireland is a fascinating place because, like, we have structures on the island that predate the pyramids. The Newgrange portal tomb goes back like 5,000 plus years,
Jeez.
and yet as a country, we're not even 100 years old. We will celebrate that in the next couple of years. You had the Easter Rising in 1916, which leads to the War of Independence, and then the signing of the treaty with the British. So it's and then, like, I suppose the troubles up north really begin as a result of the late 1960s. You have kind of the nationalist side who feel that they are being oppressed, who feel that they are not getting civil rights. That begins a civil rights movement. Then the loyalists, who are loyal to the British Crown, respond to that, and then I suppose that would have been the late 60s. And then there was an incident called Bloody Sunday that happened in 72, where British forces in the late 60s, the British Army were sent into the north, and in 72 they shot 26 civilians, and 14 people died.
Wow.
I believe, and they were unarmed, so that led to the escalation of the conflict.
Man, that's yeah. So first, I want to say that, dang, that's that sounds like a lot of history in just a short amount of time, the last 100 years. And then two, you sound incredibly knowledgeable about all of this. Are you a scholar?
Somewhat. I mean, I suppose it's interesting in Ireland because we're such a small little island. We are exposed, I think, and we have such a history of a diaspora and people going to the UK, people going to the United States. We're exposed to news from everywhere, and I think Irish people, we seem to have this wonderful curiosity. So I've always been interested in what's happening, and so that's always existed within me. But I have always been passionate about education. I've worked in higher ed now for 15 years, so yes, in ways. I suppose I am a scholar, though I'm not teaching at the moment. I have in the past, but
Hmm.
I have in the past I have done so.
So, what were your areas of expertise or your degrees?
So I started with what would probably be in the United States be what a liberal arts degree. In Ireland,
Okay.
it's a little bit different. So if you imagine, or you go in the United States, you have a freeway almost. When you go to university, for a lot of students, they're not sure, they're undecided when they first go to university, or they may change, or they may take a lot of gen ed subjects.
Hmm.
We don't have that in Ireland. We have, if you do engineering, then you study engineering courses.
Mm.
You tend to focus. If you're in the sciences, you tend to do sciences. Now that has opened up a little bit in the last maybe 20 years or so, and you might take some gen eds, but particularly around languages. But really, it's much more of a train track system. Once you're on the track, that's where you're going. And
Mm.
the possible slight exception to that is liberal arts, or an arts degree, as we would say. And in an
Okay.
arts degree, in first year, I was able to take four subjects. And coming out of school at 18, I really didn't know what I wanted to do, but I loved English. I loved geography. I was fascinated by psychology.
Mm.
And I suppose I had the opportunity to study sociology. So those were the four subjects I chose. And I had wondered, would I go into psychology, but I always felt that I wouldn't do a psychology degree because I would have received my degree at 21, and then you couldn't get into clinical psychology until you're 25 in Ireland, because what life experience do you have, and if you're meeting people and say they're going through a divorce, or they're going through bereavement, or things like that, then the feeling is that you need a little bit more life experience. So I knew that wasn't going to be the case, and it may be something I went back to later. But I thought,
Mm.
I'm interested in it, so I can do it at liberal arts level. So I went in and I did that, and I ended up, though, loving English. I had an absolutely amazing tutor in first year English, and I also had some really great lecturers. And I really thought I would lean more to maybe sociology, but the geography department in UCC, University College Cork, when I went, were absolutely amazing. And it felt to me that I could do social geography, which would essentially be sociology in many respects, but more grounded. At least
Mm.
that's how it felt to me.
Yeah.
And so I that's what I did for my undergrad, English and geography, and then I went on to further study afterwards, and I ended up writing my dissertation on cinematic representation of Ireland and the Irish. So always kind of interested in national identity,
Yeah.
always interested in, I mean, it combined English lit and geography. So it was the best of both worlds for me, I suppose.
Yeah.
And it allowed me to explore that interest in cinema. But it also really get into identity, because I find identity fascinating. And I find national identity really fascinating in a fun way.
And that's interesting. So, of course, you have a very what's the correct way to say this? You have a very experienced education, I think is the correct term. Um, so what? Because I'm curious. I graduated university as well, and I never decided to go do a master's program, at least as of yet. But what made you go with cinematic representation of Ireland and the Irish? Like, what kind of was your pulling, if maybe that's a correct term, to kind of go down that route? Or maybe here's a better question: how did you come up with that thesis topic? Because that sounds very very niche.
Yeah, I guess it was in ways. Okay, so I'll tell you where maybe some of it comes from, and it goes right back to my great great grandparents.
Okay.
So, and we were talking about our the history of Ireland and the North, but Ireland has always had an interesting relationship with the UK, because they decided they'd come and kind of set up camp in Ireland, and we kind of said, maybe you want to leave? And they said, no, we're good hanging out here, and we weren't too happy about that. So that led to numerous conflicts over the years. And I had a great great grandfather who was exiled to Australia back when it was
Wow.
a penal colony, and that would have been in the 1800s, and that would have been when people spent a long time on a ship getting to go anywhere. And if you survived, then well done, and you
Hmm.
generally set up a new life there. And he went over with his brothers, and 7 of them went over, and 6 of them set up home. And he said, yeah, it's lovely, and the weather is great, but this pasty Irish skin, yeah, not too sure about this. Going to hop back on that boat and head home.
Yeah.
And at the same time, my great great grandmother, her family had gone to the United States, and they all set up home there. And I have cousins all over the United States now, actually on both sides of my family. But she decided that, this was lovely and America was great, but I'm going to go back home. And so these two people met in the 1800s in Ireland, in rural County Kerry, which is as rural as you could possibly imagine.
Wow.
And I guess bonded over spending a long time on a ship because, well, they had that in common.
Uh-huh.
And so I get, we love to travel, but we really love to come home. And so I that's possibly where my love of Ireland came from. And as I said, I think identity is really fascinating. I've always been fascinated by it, but I've always wondered, like, what is it about national identity? Like, what makes me Irish, and what makes
Yeah.
somebody else Italian? And if it's that, if it's just that you're born there, well, what about if you're born and you move and you spend longer, or you just you happen to be born in a country, but you're raised, almost immediately elsewhere. Like, I would know people who were born in the United States, right, and as a result have a US passport, but
Hmm.
they were born there because maybe their dad was working in tech in San Francisco at the time, and then they moved back to Ireland when they were 4 months, and they've
Hmm.
grown up their entire life in Ireland. So they hold a US passport, but they've never lived in the United States. They don't know the United States. So I've always been interested in what makes us feel connected to a place, and how we construct identity, and what's the basis of that. And I love storytelling. I mean, I'm
Hmm.
Irish. We're a nation of storytellers, but movies are great stories. I mean, that's what movies are.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was doing it now, maybe I'd be looking more at TV shows, because I think that allows you the expands to delve further into things. In a movie, you generally get, anywhere mainly from 90 minutes to 120 minutes. Obviously, TV show allows you more, but it's a great storytelling medium. But in Ireland, as a small nation, a lot of the times we have had to require on external funding for movies. So the funding has come from British um, studios or American studios.
Hmm.
And then that obviously impacts on the movie, the storytelling, because if I give you a lot of money, well, that comes with conditions, and
Hmm.
I want to see certain things out of the movie. So I
Yeah.
was interested in looking at that and the impact that had. And so that's really what I endeavored to look at in the thesis, was the way in which Ireland and the Irish had been represented in American movies, in British movies, and
Mm.
by the Irish themselves.
Man, that was that's a lot. But I think it's cool that you care enough about, the area that you're from to delve into different sources of different um sources, different media sources to be able to try and see, like, is Ireland being represented the way that it should? Because a lot of people just kind of take for granted, the fact that, oh, it's whatever. Like, for example, whenever the United States, or some sort of country or whatever makes a movie or a TV show and they show Mexico, it's always got that orangey, reddish, yellowish tint to it. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, just as an example, like, that's not a very accurate representation of Mexico. Like, whenever I see Ireland in movies, which, to be fair, is rare. You don't see a lot of people from Ireland, or hear about a lot of people from Ireland, or even, see visually Ireland at all in movies or TV shows. It's very much along the lines of red-haired drunks, you know what I mean? Or leprechauns. Like, that's really all that you get. So I think it's kind of cool that you delve into the idea of trying to accurately represent your country, like, because you just don't see a lot of that.
Well, I think, I mean, it's really interesting what you're saying, say about the representation of Mexico, right? Because part of that goes back to our geographical imagination.
True.
And that is when you think of a place, what is it that you imagine? And so sometimes that's where's the money coming from informs that presentation of the geographical imagination, because very often, because the locals have seen it so many times, they want to subvert it. So sometimes, in, say, an Irish context, it will mean that movies tend to be set in cities, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes, if they have Irish funding, because they want to look at things that that aren't explored if the funding comes from America, where, okay, we want lush green fields, we want pints of Guinness, we want bridges, over flowing rivers. And
Hmm.
so it can be, that's, I've seen that too much. I want to look at something else, because everything is so multi-layered, right?
Sure.
And identity is multi-layered, and national identity is multi-layered. And I think that's the interesting thing, though, because we all have a geographical imagination about a place. So if I say to you Australia, that will immediately bring, a geographical imagining to mind.
Hmm.
And now a lot of that goes back to what you're exposed to growing up. What images did you see, what books did you read, what did your parents or guardians expose you to? But it all feeds into it, and it can differ from, country to country, because of the different countries' relationships with others. But
Hmm.
I just find all of that stuff really interesting to kind of tease it apart and see why certain things became, so intrinsic, in essence, to a culture.
Yeah. True. I'm not sure what to add onto that, but I agree with you. I think that a lot of people do have just like that mentality of, you think of something, and even if you've never necessarily been there, you already have preconceived ideas of what it is. Um, so I do want to ask you this, though. And of course, the answer you might have already said, or you might have, of course, hinted at. But what would be like your favorite subject to talk about, rather than nationalism, or the cinematic representation of Ireland? What would be something that, like, you say you have a degree in also English and geography? So, like, what do you feel like is your passion aside from the whole nationalist thing?
Um, well, like, I've mentioned identity, but I suppose, like, I mean, I think there are numerous passions that I have. Like, prior to COVID, I used to try to go to a live music concert at least every fortnight. So once every couple of weeks, I would be at live music. We love storytelling. I think one of the things that probably ties into everything that I'm talking about is the pub, and the Irish pub. And because there's a lot of, I guess, stereotypes that, as you said, in relation to, like, how Ireland is presented in movies, drunk people, like, fighting all the time. And I don't the Irish pub is nothing like that. Like, or even how, say, oh, I can't think of the name. There's a chain of pubs in America that are supposed to be kind of Irish, and like it's super loud music, and it's girls in like short tartan skirts and stuff like that. And you go to an Irish pub, and it's absolutely nothing like that.
Yeah.
I think the most surprising thing for people when they come to Ireland, and if they go into an Irish pub, is there's no pipe music. There is just the sound of people talking, because the pub is where people go to meet and go to socialize and go to chat. And you may get drunk as a result of that, but the aim is not to get when you go in the door is not to get drunk. The aim is to chat with your friends, and the aim is just to tell stories, and the aim is to share in that community. And you might get chatting to the person beside you, and the two groups kind of come together, and that happens a lot in Ireland. But it is something that I think surprises people, that generally when you go into an Irish pub, unless there's a live match taking place, the televisions generally won't be on. There won't be the pipe music, and it still will just be filled with noise and chatter, and that it can be anything from storytelling to sport. We absolutely adore sport here, to the ridiculous, and it's kind of where mobile phones have been. They're wonderful, and they have made so many things so accessible, but equally they have kind of they've ruined the absurd in some ways, because what would happen on a night out could be something along the lines of, right, somebody would say something like, hey, do you remember when Nicolas Cage was in Twin Peaks? And everyone's like, Nicolas Cage was in Twin Peaks, huh? And somebody else has just run with this, going, "Yeah, he was. He worked with Dale Cooper. He was an FBI special agent. He helped in the search, for Laura Palmer's killer." Whereas now, somebody just take out their phone and be like, "No, IMDb says he wasn't." And we love the absurd in Ireland, and that's what I just worry that there's definitely a tendency towards literalism, and you see that even with the obsession with stats in sports, and rather than trusting your eye or talking about the game, it becomes just stats, and this player did this and this. Like, we have a playwright called Samuel Beckett. Don't know if you've ever heard of Beckett, but he was an Irish playwright. He was wonderful, and he wrote this play called Waiting for Godot. And the first time Waiting for Godot was reviewed, it debuted in Paris. And the French reviewer who wrote the review said, "It's a play in which nothing happens twice." And that is just magnificent. Like, how can nothing happen twice? But that's what Beckett had he had a wonderful wry sense of humor, and he was absolutely brilliantly absurd. And I think that exists in Irish culture. That's part of it. There are a whole host of other parts of it too. But I do love the sense of absurdity that exists in Ireland, certainly.
Man, so of course, a lot of stereotypes are thrown towards people about the Irish. Like you said, that bars aren't as crazy as people make them out to be. People aren't as drunk all the time as people make them out to be. And I feel like that, at least, in terms of being an American, like, you just see so many unnecessarily stereotypes, if that's how I can say it, just about everything. And I do feel honestly that, like, Ireland is definitely one of those places that is just hit so hard, and I'm not sure why, but it's kind of nice to hear, that that's not the case, because like I said, I have been to Ireland, and it is very true. People are very nice. They're very personable. Like, of course, they go to the pub and they have a good time, but would you argue that the Irish people are very community focused?
Yeah, I definitely think that that is still the case. I mean, I think it's changing. Like everywhere, there's definitely been a focus on the individual
Mm,
globally since probably 1980 or
true,
thereabouts. But
true.
I still think it exists in Ireland, that the community is important, and that goes back a long way. Like there's an Irish term, mehel, and mehel is goes back to the time when farmers, when there wasn't the equipment, right? And
Hmm.
so you needed a group at harvest time to work together, because it wasn't going to be possible to harvest the land yourself. And so your neighbors came over, and we worked on my farm today, and then tomorrow we went to your farm, and the following day we went to Seamus's, and the next day we went to Paddy's, and then working together we were able to do that, and the community came together and the community ate together.
Hmm.
And I think it does still exist in Ireland, that focus on the community, and ensuring that all aspects of the community you try and support, because essentially you're only as strong as your the people who need maybe maybe the most support. Maybe I'm
Hmm.
but I do like that there is that sense of community, that sense of belonging. I think that's one of the things that's been very difficult for people in this period. And I do think alienation is the antithesis of being human, because
Yeah.
for me, and I know there'll be a whole host of people with differing viewpoints, but like as humans, we do want to connect. And I mean, religion is even about connection. Ignore the rules and regulations of it, right? And all of them. But religion is essentially about connection.
Yeah.
Everything we do is about connection. And it can be to anything. It can be to one another. It can be to a pet, the connection people have with a dog or a cat or a horse or a fish or a parrot. Um, but I do think there's an intrinsic desire uh, to connect, and I think that when you see a community, like when you experience something like in Ireland, we had a civil war, right?
Hmm.
After the War of Independence with the British, we got done fighting with them, and then we've had a fight amongst ourselves.
Hmm.
And so go back to 1990 in Ireland, and
Hmm.
you're less than 70 years on from a civil war. Wounds are still raw enough. You're seeing the generations change, but Ireland qualified for the 1990 World Cup. It was the first time we'd ever qualified for a soccer World Cup, and we went to Italy, and I suppose it was the time where things were changing. Ireland had joined the European Union in the 70s. Money was beginning to flow into the country.
Hmm.
And we were historically very poor country, but it brought everyone together. So it didn't matter what side you were on in the Civil War. It didn't matter who you voted for. You were cheering on the Irish national team. In the group stages, our, we famously, as is said here, we beat England 1-1. Um, we we right. That's how it was considered.
Yeah.
We ended up getting to the second round, and then we played Romania. And we beat Romania in a penalty shootout. In Ireland at that time, the vast majority of the country only had two television stations. Okay.
Wow.
So much has changed in such a short space of time. But in that
Yeah.
time, most places, they showed that game when it went to extra time. They showed it on both television stations live.
Wow.
Okay. So everybody saw it. It was a collective. Everyone came together. There's an Irish American comedian who moved to Ireland, at that time, he moved in July 1990, and famously said, "I moved in July 1990, 3 weeks after you beat Romania on penalties, four weeks before you finished partying." It just brought the entire country together, and that was just a collective moment where people came together, and it really was this kind of wonderful time, and you see the scenes looking back of street parties. I don't think it could happen now, because at that time Ireland wasn't as developed. People weren't as concerned about, or had to be concerned about jobs or things like that. So
Yeah.
it probably would be very different now. And if you look at the way in which we consume media now, we consume television now, we consume music now, the collective is shifting. Like, ordinarily, right there, we've had, there's traditionally been, certainly in Ireland and the UK, there's usually a song of the summer, okay, that people know, and that just becomes like the biggest song of the summer.
Yeah.
That hasn't existed for the past couple of years,
Really?
because like, people aren't really listening to the radio in the same way. People are listening, we're accessing it in different ways, which is great in that it allows you to focus on what you want. But in terms of the collective, there's no familiarity with the what others are listening to. And so the great live events that bring us together, when you think about the way in which, say, people watch the finale of MASH or of Dallas, that's gone. Like, yes, people kind of watch TV shows, but they don't tend to watch collectively. Like, sometimes you'll get a fleeting moment of it. Like Tiger King is probably an example, but think how quickly Tiger King disappeared.
Yeah, true.
And people, I thought, because when Tiger King came out, I thought we'd see loads of Joe Exotic or Carol Baskin Halloween costumes. We didn't even have that. It was gone from the collective conscious at that point.
Yeah.
So that is, I think it's just interesting to see that, because you have the ability to access, your own media now on your own devices. You're not required to watch like in Ireland's case, a television station that only has two channels, or a radio that only has so many stations. You now have access to as many stations or songs as you want, because if you can get online, you can pretty much get whatever you want. So it's definitely changed the experience fundamentally.
Yeah. Man, like, I'll say this. I wish that we could go back to the 1980s Ireland and just be unified as a nation, or unified as the world, because we see so much division nowadays. It's heartbreaking. At least here in the States, especially with the election and stuff that's happened recently, there's been so much division, and of course, it's both sides that are at fault. Some people are more vocal about their beliefs than others. And usually those people that are so vocal, they just dismiss everything else, which then starts this, like, you rubbed me the wrong way, I can't accept your opinion and everything. But I say all that to say I wish we could go back to the 1980s of Ireland, just because it sounded like people were so unified. And I mean, to be fair, it sounds like you're even more unified than at least the States are right now.
Well, I look, I think I love George Carlin. I love comedy. I love George Carlin. And as Carlin pointed out, though, if and Bill Hicks used to talk about this as well. If you watch the news, right, the news is just war, death, plague, famine, war, death, plague, famine. And you look out the window and it's a nice sunny day and the birds are chirping.
True.
And if you say hello to your neighbors, chances are they probably will say hello back. I think we have seen a massive rise, though, in the level of fear in the world. And that has manifested itself in different ways. But 24-hour news media, and the fact that we have access to this all the time, but whenever you go to a news site, it's just bad news.
Yeah.
And so I would say, like, one of the experience, I'll give you a concrete example of something small, and that language is really interesting because language gives so much away. When I started working with study abroad students coming to Ireland, um, I talk about what was the weekend like, what did you get up to, what did you do, and previously what was strange, or what was new, they talk about, oh, had a weird experience or this, but weird is like, I don't understand it, it seems bizarre to me, like, but I'm a little bit standoffish until I know a bit more. When you hear that question now, it's creepy.
Hmm.
Anything new is creepy, and creepy has totally different connotations. So anything just because it's new is creepy.
Yeah.
So I'll say to a student, oh, what did you do for the weekend? Oh, I went someplace, and yeah, it was really creepy. I'm like, oh, what was creepy about, what was scary? Oh, it was just like, I didn't know what to make of it. It was just really strange. Like, did you have a bad experience? Oh no. But like, when you see that language kind of come in, I mean, that's due to me, the rise in fear. And I can understand that if all you see on the news, or all you see on your device is negative.
Hmm.
And I would go back, because Caroline used to do a piece about like how we have far more in common, our commonalities are greater than our differences, and really we should probably focus on that a lot more. And I suppose I'm lucky when I go to the United States that this funny accent that I have and talking to people means we get talking about different things. We don't talk about partisan politics, right?
Hmm.
And I think it's yeah, of course, if you get sucked into that, then you can go down the rabbit hole very quickly. But if you talk to people, generally what you'll find is that they want a better world for them. They want a better world for their kids. But a lot of times they're brought to think that the other side don't want that, or,
Hmm.
or that they're so different from one another, and these competing viewpoints. And I just don't think that's the case, because I don't, when I go there, because I'm very obviously Irish.
Hmm.
We there isn't the preconception that if I say I'm from a place, and people would immediately say, oh, that's a red state or a blue state, and they behave in certain manner. And so I don't see, therefore, the divide. Fortunately, I know it exists. Like, I'm aware from talking to students, from seeing friends, and all that. But
Yeah.
I just wish, yeah, that we could. I don't know if I want to go back to the 80s, but I wish we could take a step back, and we could reflect, and we could see the humanity within all of us. Because I really think, I am probably an optimist at heart, because I truly believe that 7 out of 10 people in the world are good, and will help you out. Yeah,
Hmm.
of course, there's a percentage who aren't, and we need to be vigilant towards that. But I believe that the majority of people in the world are good people.
Hmm. So I'm going to kind of change gears. I'm kind of curious. When I was in Ireland, there was, of course, you guys have you speak English, but you also have your own language.
Mhm.
Isn't it like Celtic or something like that?
Yeah, we a lot of people, I suppose, outside of Ireland call it Gaelic, but in
Gaelic,
Ireland
yeah.
we just call it Irish.
Irish. Okay. Is that language dying?
No,
Really?
it's not. It's probably had a little bit of a revival in some ways, because Ireland has become a much more diverse place, which is great to see. I mean, we exported people, right? That's what
Hmm.
Ireland specialized in for not just years, not just decades, but centuries.
Hmm.
We exported people all around the world. And as I said, things began to change in 1990 in Ireland, and we saw people from around the world want to come to Ireland, to live and to work here. And I suppose one of the things that that can do sometimes is, and it's a fine line that you tread, is it possibly makes people more aware of their own culture and their own language and their own heritage.
Mm-hmm.
And then so we've actually seen a rise in the number of what are called Gael schools, so Irish speaking schools. And so the language has definitely, I think, had a little bit of a bump. It's probably, there are parts of the country where it would be spoken every day. But English is the main language of the country. Though I think the fact that we are Irish, people who are speaking English means that we generally have an interesting sentence structure anyway. And I would argue that is one of the reasons why we have so many great writers out of Ireland. Is one of the things when you are colonized, right? Your colonial master tends to depict you as stupid because they want to depict what they're doing as a civilizing mission. And so they did that. Like there were a lot of stereotypes out there about the thick Mick or stupid Paddy. And those were spread because, it was the British were here to civilize us. So this is going back a long time now. British people are lovely, right? I want to make sure that comes across. But this was what was spread at the time. And part of that was because we were speaking our own language, and they tried so hard to get rid of it. And a lot of Irish people will blame the decline of the Irish language on the British, but it wasn't. I don't believe it was the penal laws, as they were called, which punished you for speaking Irish. I think the Irish people themselves made a decision, right? Because if I can argue with you in your own language, and there was a famous Irish man named Daniel O'Connell, and he famously said, I can drive a coach and four, which would be a coach and four horses, through any British law. And he went to the UK and he won Catholic emancipation from the penal laws, so you could no longer be penalized purely for being Catholic. And he did that because he elegantly spoke in their courts. So you can't depict somebody as stupid when they can argue back at you. And I think that is another driver in terms of Irish people and in terms of our language. And so there's so many. I mentioned Beckett, but like one of the other stories about Oscar Wilde, if you're familiar with Oscar Wilde, but there's a great story told about Oscar, who famously said when he arrived in America and was asked at Ellis Island, had he anything to declare? And he said, nothing except my genius. But he also went to Colorado, and he was an extravagant spender. So he used to do these speaking tours to raise money. So they brought him to the mining town of Leadville, and the miners in Leadville, Oscar gave a talk on art and aesthetics, and unsurprisingly, the miners were pretty bored by this. So they decided they were going to have a bit of fun with Oscar, and they were going to bring him down into the mine, right, and get him drunk and leave him in the mine overnight. Now, Oscar thought these big strapping men were nice to look at, so he decided he'd go into the mine. But they went down and they all started drinking. And in the end, Oscar was the only one sober enough to operate the lift and to bring everybody back up. And he famously said, when you invite an Irishman to dinner, you best make it 5 courses, not 3.
I like that a lot. So just out of curiosity, are you able to speak, like, do you yourself know Gaelic?
Yeah, tá Gaeilge Gomsa.
What the heck? What'd you just say?
I just said that I'm able to speak Irish, but the sentence structure is really interesting because tá Gaeilge Gomsa means literally it's Irish that I have within me.
Oh, that's interesting. So would it be considered a hard language to learn because of the sentence structure compared to English?
Yeah, though English has its own.
True,
we grow up with English, so we don't even think about it. Like learning a language is very much like culture, right? Because there are these rules and regulations, but you grow up with it. So until it's pointed out to you, you don't even think of it. And culture is the exact same because you grow up with it. So you don't even, and usually with language, at least it's pointed out. With culture, a lot of the time, nobody points out. Um, so Irish can be it can be tricky because of especially when you're trying to learn it being an English speaker, because the sentence structure is so different.
Hmm.
But we actually have a group of students from China who are in Ireland learning Irish, and
Wow.
they are well able to speak it. But it's, I think when you come at it with an English mind, it can be difficult because you're translating and you're doing so literally, and it just won't work in Irish.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So I want to ask you about sports because I
Hmm.
understand that the Irish are pretty big into sports. I know Gaelic football is a big thing. My friend that I told you about earlier, he plays Gaelic football, and I had to look it up because it's a mix between soccer and American football and rugby or something like that. But
Hmm.
what would be your favorite sport and something that you just enjoy from it?
Um, so I suppose the other famous Irish sport over here is hurling. And I remember going to America and telling people about hurling, and they were looking at me going, "People watch that?" I said, "Yeah, like we've with competitions, like all the counties play, and then there's an All Ireland final, and we've 80,000 plus people come to watch. Like they come to watch hurling, and they thought." To hurl was to throw up. It's like, can you imagine 80,000 people going to watch that? No, hurling is it's like a cross between field hockey, lacrosse, and murder. So those three things combined give you hurling. It is the fastest field sport in the world, and it's absolutely incredible. And any listeners should definitely go to YouTube and check out hurling, because it really is a magical sport. It is just wonderful to watch. It is so fast. It's so physical, and I love hurling. I love all. I mean, I'd watch pretty much any sport, but I do love hurling. I love soccer, and I actually do love American football also.
Mm. Yeah, I'm watching hurling right now. Since you mentioned it, that looks like such an insane sport.
Yes, yes, people watch it and just can't quite believe, because I mean, you can see the ball moves
Yeah,
about as quick as, say, an ice hockey puck almost,
yeah, yeah.
but they're not nearly as padded as the ice hockey guys, you know.
Hmm. Is it kind of like is the ball almost like a baseball? It almost looks like a baseball.
It is. It's very similar to a baseball in many ways. It's probably a little bit smaller than a baseball, but very very similar. Yes,
So like very dense and hard.
it is. It's a hard ball. That's
Okay.
what allows you to knock it
Oh,
down
okay,
down
yeah.
the field.
Yeah.
But it also means that you have to be able to catch that because it is moving.
Yeah.
And but at the top level, there are very few injuries because the players are so skilled,
Mm.
and they know how to protect themselves when they are going up to catch the ball, and so on and so forth.
Gotcha. That's interesting. I'll have to look into that because what I've wanted to do with sports is I've wanted to get into rugby and I've wanted to get into more European sports just because I find that stuff to be more interesting than American football or even baseball. I'm not a big baseball fan because I feel like it's too slow. And then American football, like, yeah, there's some fun in it, but it seems very slow to me in some aspects. But I do know that are you a Denver Broncos fan?
I am a massive Denver Broncos fan.
Yikes.
Uh, which, yeah, yeah. I mean, we are recording this after the Broncos were forced to play a game with no quarterback. Which, interesting things always seem to happen to the Broncos. And I can tell you that trying to watch from thousands of miles and a time zone that's 7 hours ahead makes it interesting at
Hmm.
times when games are taking place and they're kicking off here at like 20 past 3 in the morning, and
Yeah.
you're rolling straight from that into work. That
Yeah.
makes it interesting.
Yeah, no, I kind of feel your pain. I'm thankfully able to watch football, or I'll say soccer, but I try and call it football because that's what it is. It's not like it's not like hand egg, American football. But sometimes, I'm a big Chelsea fan, and so if I want to sometimes watch the Chelsea game on Saturday, it's at 4:30 in the morning my time, even though it's I think like half past noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon for you guys. And so it's like I understand the pain of having to wake up early or stay up late to watch the game simply because of the fact that I try and do that on a regular basis because I love the sport. But
Hmm.
you guys got clapped, man, 3-31.
Yeah,
Like,
well, hey, we didn't have any offense, and the Bucks with the most stacked offense, certainly in terms of names, they only scored 3 points against the Saints as well.
true. Man, like I said, I'm not a big football fan, so I don't know the dynamics of the teams or anything, but that's that can be sad. I understand because of course I live in Seattle, and so I sometimes watch the Seahawks play because if I don't, then I'm a heretic. So I have to support the local teams at least somewhat, and so I'll sometimes watch the Seahawks. And like there's been some bad beats in the past. We've gotten destroyed a few times, and so I can understand your pain a little bit. But what got you into American football? Because you have hurling, and you have Gaelic football, and you have football, and you have I don't know if cricket's a thing over there, but you have all these other sports. Why American football?
They showed it on TV when I was growing up, and I just fell in love with the game. And there was
Mm.
this team playing in neon orange, and they had this player wearing number 7, and he used to buzz kind of here, there, and everywhere. And I loved it from that moment watching it. I was absolutely transfixed by the sport, and I have kind of watched it ever since. And it has, I suppose, that's one of the blessings, and it's both a blessing and a curse that it's now more accessible because I can watch all the games now because of Game Pass.
Mhm.
But that, like, previously I would have maybe have to rely on a newspaper report, so I wasn't staying up into the middle of the night because I just couldn't. It wasn't
Yeah.
going to be shown over here, so it wasn't until the next day or the day after even that I was able to access the result. Now I can watch it, so I will.
Mhm.
But yeah, I fell for the Broncos, and I do call it an affliction because I'm compelled to watch these games even when they are taking place in the middle of the night, even when the team are going out there with no QB,
Yeah.
and I know what the result is likely to be, and yet I still watch.
Yeah. No, I understand your pain. Of course, soccer and football are totally different, but last year when I was watching Chelsea play, and even the year before, it was definitely a building season, and so we would go against some of the lower teams in the Premier League, and we would just get handed. We get clapped so hard, just destroyed. And I was like, why do I watch these games, man? Like, I know we're gonna lose. Like, why can't we? So I feel your pain there. I feel your pain. I'm also my good buddy, best friend for years and years and years is he's from Dallas, Dallas, Texas, and so he's a Cowboys fan. And so we don't have our good quarterback right now. Dak Prescott broke his leg or did whatever the heck happened, and so we have whatever his name is, and he's mediocre. I'll say that. And so the Cowboys are losing a lot, and we're not doing so hot. And so I understand your suffering and your pain when it comes to seeing games like the one that just passed.
I mean, that's part of sports.
That is,
You
yeah.
just gotta take the good with the bad. Unfortunately.
Yeah, you definitely got to. So kind of wrapping things up, you say that you co-host two different podcasts.
Yeah, so I actually I suppose I am one of the people who hosts the English language content for Broncos Europe. We're the largest Broncos fan group outside of North America, and we
Wow.
have content in Italian, in French, in German, in Spanish, and in Portuguese. So we've created this real community over the last few months, and the the way the community has come together has been absolutely amazing over the past few years, and we really can't wait until we can actually meet up again and have watch parties all over
Yeah.
Europe, which is going to be a lot of fun. So
Hmm.
if there and I also I host the Irish NFL show. So if there's anyone out there who is an NFL fan and enjoys hearing funny Irish accents, you can find the Irish NFL show on Facebook and Twitter. But I am passionate about education, as I said,
Hmm.
and I co-host with a colleague, Mark, and I co-host, who's based in California. We have a podcast called Adventures in Advising, and we talk to advisors, we talk to faculty members, we talk to support staff, and we talk to students, all about different issues in higher ed. And yeah, I really enjoy that. I love getting to chat to people involved and hearing about why they got interested in higher ed, why they work in higher ed, and for students talking about their experiences of higher ed.
Wow. You sound like you have a full plate.
Yeah, I like to juggle a lot of things.
Yeah. So, if you don't mind me asking, you say, you co-host the Broncos podcast for Greater Europe, right?
Yeah, yep.
How do you mind me asking, like, how large that community is? Like, you don't have to give me a number or anything. I'm not trying to delve into analytics or anything, but I've just never heard of an NFL fan base outside of the States, just because most people like soccer.
It's grown, like it really has grown in popularity. And we, like, for our meetups in Dublin, we would certainly have in and around the 20-25 people.
Wow.
But like that's for meetups. I mean,
Yeah.
there are obviously more people who are involved, who may not necessarily make it to that. But we've a decent contingent in Germany, in Spain, in France, in Sweden. So the NFL is definitely growing in popularity.
Wow. I just never knew that. That's really, really cool. I'm happy to hear that. Some of the American culture is, I'll say, rubbing off on other people. Some of the things we do, not totally, dismissed or anything. Like we do some good things over here, like sports. So
Definitely.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I want to ask you one last question. And this is a question that I like to ask everyone because the reason I started this podcast is because I like to understand the psychology of people, just how they think and everything that, involves learning. I like to learn. And so, what would be like a piece of advice or a saying or something like that you feel has, stayed with you through your life, or something that might have impacted you as a kid that you would like to share with someone?
I'm going to say two things.
Okay.
I'll say them briefly because I know we need to wrap up. But I will say, firstly, things don't have to be perfect to be wonderful, right? It's imperfection that brings us joy a lot of the time. So don't always seek perfection. Just go with it.
Yeah.
But I think what I would also say is, for me, I suppose my philosophy is that essentially for me, it's ultimately about the 3 L's: love, laughter, loss. And that's what it all breaks down to. And that's what we all experience, those three things. And those are the moments that you look back on and that you remember. Whatever it is, that can be love for another person, that can be love for a sports team, that can be love for a pet. We remember the times we laughed. There's no sensation in the world like when you can't stop yourself from laughing. It just feels, so amazing, and the rush of endorphins. And loss, what would be that? The loss of, a parent, the loss of a relative, the loss of a friend. Loss can mean different things, but those three things are what make us human.
That's good. That's real good. Awesome. Well, I don't want to add on to that. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you for educating me about everything, and just being an open book and telling some really awesome stories. Like, I thoroughly enjoy these types of conversations. One, because I don't have to speak as much, and I love that. And two, I just like learning. I love that. If you don't mind, next time I'm in Ireland, I'll hit you up and we can go grab a beer or coffee or something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that sounds great. No, please do keep in touch. I've really enjoyed having a chat to you, and I hope listeners will enjoy it as well.
Yeah.
But cheers. Thanks very much, Daniel.
Yeah, of course. And I will say this real quick. Whenever we're done and you have a spare moment, please send me the links to your podcasts or whatever you would like to have me put in the notes of this episode. just so then I have everything in one spot, and so I can just copy and paste it.
Absolutely, will do.
Awesome. Sweet. Well, thank you so much. I hope you have a great night and a great week. I really do.
You too. You're an absolute gentleman.
Yeah, you too, man. That was so much fun. I can't wait to speak to you again whenever that is, and just hear more of your stories. That was so cool. I love that. I love it. And your accent's awesome, dude. I love it.
Thank you. No, keep in touch. Nice one, Daniel. Take it easy. Good luck.
Yeah. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Dude, Colum's so cool. I love that. I love speaking to people with accents, because here's the thing. Of course, I have one, but I live in the States, and so it sounds just like a normal, boring accent, right? But I love people with accents, dude. Not to mention, oh my goodness, I love it when people just talk and they just keep going, and they just keep spilling more information, so then I can just soak it all in and learn. Like, there are some times, if I'm being honest, dude, there are some times to where Colum would just keep talking, and I was like, I don't know where to go from this. Like, there's just so many good things. Like, where do I go? But I love that. I love that so much, because there's so much knowledge that I'm soaking in. There's so much information that I'm pulling in, and it's honestly such a blessing to be able to pick someone's brain about that. Not to mention, I got to learn a bit about his family history. That is so cool to me. Like, your great grandparents, there are so many greats in there. Your past family, they met on a ship, and they just kind of hung out, and then they got together, and then long story short, you're here. That's so cool to me. I love that. Anyway, thanks, Colum, so much for just being open, bro. I love that. That was awesome. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Across the Pond. Please share this with your friends and family, as well as giving my email to someone you think would love to star on an episode of the show. Connect with me on Twitter, find us on YouTube, and please consider checking out Patreon if you would like to be a part of Across the Pond. Thanks to Mark for the logo, and for the Black Couch label and Ollie H for the music. Tune in next Sunday for another awesome episode of Across the Pond.